Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar on maximizing energy data on the road to net zero. I'm Josh O'Neill, edie's intelligence editor, and I'll be sharing the session on gathering energy data for your business and using it to create a clear business case for decarbonisation across your organization. We have around 45 minutes today to explore the topic, and that'll comprise about 30 minutes of masterclass presentation from our experts and then a 15-minute Q&A for the panelists after that. A few house rules to specify before we begin. First and foremost, we have a Q&A function in the bar below. I'd like to get through as many questions as possible during the Q&A. So if you, as soon as you get a question or you already have something that you kind of want to ask, it's always good to put it in that Q&A box, get it ready for when we get onto that Q&A segment. There's also an upvote function. So if you see a question that someone's already done that you would want to hear answered or just something that you think would be very interesting to hear discussed, please upvote it so we know what is the kind of most interesting ones or the most popular ones so they can get to them first. Finally, there is a remote a react emoji function if you would like to kind of let on speakers know during the session anything that resonates with you particularly or anything that is particularly interesting to you. One other thing is that the event is being recorded. So if you would like to listen to the webinar after it's finished, you can. It'll be sent to you by email or on our site. So there's no need to kind of take notes or anything like that. So before I introduce our speakers, I'll quickly set out just the context for the topic today, which is that, the energy transition, as we know, begins with a clear and comprehensive energy data strategy. Only by monitoring and understanding and taking action on the energy that a company uses in every facet of its functions can we begin to make changes that reduce emissions, save costs, and begin that transition to a greener business environment. Of course, the beauty of data analysis and management is it doesn't only improve emission rates and create a more sustainable company, but it can also reduce prices and create efficiencies throughout the value chain for companies that kind of want to invest. Gathering data isn't easy, of course. It can be an incredibly complex task, which is made more difficult by siloed processes, geographically distant kind of sites and third parties that make gathering that data difficult, as well as varying consumption patterns across the whole range of business work functions, from built environment to transport to daily usage. So in introducing the speakers now who kind of give us insights and advice on this topic, we have Shane Leadbetter, who's contract manager at Vertex, as well as Paul Krause, product development manager with SSE Energy Solutions. We will also be joined by Mark Belham, who's also from Vertex, for the Q&A segment. But for now, Paul, since we'll start with you, would you like to introduce yourself briefly and then kind of dive right into your topic today?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul, product development manager at SSE, and I work specifically within our digital services team. So we're predominantly focused with what we can do with data, the data value chain, from our buildings, estates, energy systems, energy assets, gathering that data up, making it usable in some way and understanding where that data comes from. And then building out applications and processes where we can begin to optimize buildings and assets to achieve our ultimate objective as SSE, which is net zero, but also supporting other business operations as well. So we work typically for other parts of our energy business. So we're involved in optimizing various assets and energy systems, both in terms of heat networks, renewable assets, battery storage, grid facing trading, that kind of thing. And we also have a customer-facing part of our business, which is where we engage with the likes of Vertex and Shane and his team there, where we're looking at actually partnering and delivering optimized outcomes using the data that we're gathering. So that's kind of our role in the world and what we're focused on. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about what sort of energy data do we need, or I say energy data, what data do we need to drive energy optimization in buildings specifically, but we'll talk quite broadly as well around the types of data that might be available, and then the kind of processes that we want to apply to that data to achieve our objectives. So next slide. The first thing really then is setting out what those objectives are. So we talk an awful lot about the importance of digitization in terms of the energy transition and actually moving, falling in line with the objectives set out by the National Energy Systems Operator, NESO, for a clean energy system by 2030. They understand and acknowledge that digitization is a core pillar to that objective. And we think that applies all the way through that energy value chain as well, right down to the individual buildings and assets within those buildings and how they're managed. So gathering up the data and digitizing that system is critical. And our objectives really, decarbonisation, sort of net zero emissions, reducing energy costs, and then there's a piece around risk management as well. We tend to talk around energy as a trilemma, in that you have to factor in energy costs, carbon emissions, and resilience, and making sure that we're keeping the lights turned on and we're providing services into those buildings that need them. And often there's not really there's very few solutions. It's usually a trade-off. So how do we balance those needs? And the beauty of data, and then some of the technology that's being developed around digitization, enables us to get to those best possible outcomes. And again, what do we get if we digitize our operations, not just our energy systems? Well, hopefully we see customer satisfaction improved. We certainly see from an energy markets point of view, greater engagement with suppliers. So actually taking energy consumers and turn them into sort of active participants in that wider energy system. But then there's some sort of more tangible site benefits like minimizing site downtime, increasing sort of the effectiveness of maintenance routines and moving towards condition-based maintenance and the likes of that, and ultimately improving profitability both for partners and end users. So lots and lots of benefits, lots of reasons why we might be thinking about this, but we're massive believers that it does all start with data. Next slide, please. So again, all starts with data. There's an awful lot of data out there, and I know from the conversations I have with people that one of the biggest challenges is understanding what data do we need to gather, what data is going to be valuable, what data is actually going to drive improvements in our operations. So the first thing to do, or the first in our approach, is to define our energy system. And as I said, as SSE, we own, operate, and invest in energy systems that range from huge offshore wind farms right through to buildings that we own and operate. But typically, an energy system, if we're going to classify it as a system, will have four key components, and that's a demand component. So what's actually being used and when it's being called for. Generation. Now, in a building, that might be rooftop solar. It might be heat generation from boilers or air source heat pumps or other decarbonised heat sources. There'll be energy storage, so the sort of the stored thermal capacity of the building. So actually modelling the thermal properties of the building can form a part of that energy system analysis. And then energy supply, which is sort of the grid connection side of things. So actually what's going on outside of the building, the wider energy ecosystem, things like grid carbon intensity, market conditions, time of use tariffs. They're all things that we can explore and understand, start to gather that data up. So effectively what we're saying is what we want to do is understand our energy system. So the data that we're selecting from within that energy system needs to feed into that model. So simply put, what are we using? When are we using it? What do we have available? What does the supply look like? And can we turn things down, turn things up, and rely on stored energy at different times? So they're the questions that we can start to answer by considering the data that the energy system itself makes available to us. Next slide, please. But buildings don't exist in isolation. They're part of a wider world, and we understand that well-managed buildings, the biggest drivers on their energy consumption are not or are also factors that can be measured and data that can be collected. So it'll be a surprise to nobody that the outside air temperature will have a huge impact on the cost of heating a space. So understanding the impact of weather forecasts, both in terms of air temperature, humidity, solar irradiance, can all give us an idea of what our expectations are in terms of demand within that space as well. So these are useful sources of data. It also gives us a great picture looking backwards and actually starting to normalize and understand the historical data. Space planning. Occupancy and space planning sort of go hand in hand there, but basically how we're using our spaces, the activities that are being taken in those spaces within those buildings, the number of people will all have a big driver on the energy performance of that space in that building and that energy system as a whole. So can we gather some of that data? Can we start to understand what these driving factors actually look like? And then operational. Anybody who owns or anybody who's involved with any manufacturing process or any industrial process will know that the biggest drivers on energy consumption typically are what you're doing. So if we can understand the operational sort of backdrop in terms of data and feed that into our modeling, obviously it gives us a huge amount of insight into what we might expect. And obviously if we can understand what we might expect, we can start to think about how we can impact that and optimize going forward. Next slide, please. So where do we get the data from? We sort of talked about the sources quite broadly there and the kinds of data that we might want to capture. But obviously, there's a huge amount of technology available to us that will get hold of that data and start to feed it into an environment where we can start to work with it. The first and most obvious thing is meters. So whether that's the physical meters, the AMRs that you have, the boundaries to your sites, whether it's smart meters in smaller properties, or whether it's sub-metering, heat meters, energy meters, it all sort of can form part of that picture. And obviously, sometimes we can be blinded by the volume of data that comes through meters. But if we've got a well-structured and well-managed metering solution, then we're sort of half of the way there, I think, which is really useful. Just moving on from meters, we have BMS. So in the built environment, the BMS uses data from spaces. It looks at things like temperature data. It looks at flow rates, return temperature, all these different points of data that understand how a building's performing. All of those can be great insights into understanding how we might manage that better in the future. So again, selecting the right data points, pulling those out, getting them into a platform environment could be really, really valuable. There's historical operational data. And then aside from that, we might be looking at things like third-party data sources through APIs. So can we pull in accurate forecasting data? Can we start to pull in data from the energy systems operator in terms of grid carbon intensity, and then actually start to manage our operations based on what we can see coming from those sources of data as well? So beyond that, there's obviously the proliferation of smart technologies, IoT devices, which give us an even richer level of data down to room or even space level. So there's a huge amount available to us. There's a myriad of technology that we can be looking to leverage to get hold of that data, lots and lots of different comms methodologies. But ultimately, it's all about getting that data and putting it into an environment where we can begin to start to do something clever with it. So we tend to operate with something called a smart infrastructure platform. Other providers have probably got jazzier names, but ultimately it's the same concept, the same idea, a digital environment where we can draw this data in, aggregate it, host it, and then start to apply some logic and some science to that to actually deliver some of the outcomes we talked about at the start of this presentation. So that's the sort of the cloud, if you will, the cloud services side of things. And from there, we can start to deploy smart applications and managed services, which is where we can start to get into some of the work we've been doing with Vertex, the Minster building, which we'll get onto in a moment. And those applications, they can be varied, but ultimately they're going to be using different chunks of the data that's being made available through that platform. They might be things like automated monitoring and targeting. It might be things like AI-powered building optimization. There might be some other microgrid or smart grid control within those application backgrounds. And it's the art of the art of the possible is sort of yet to be defined. There's many sort of things that are being added to that environment all the time. So the ability within that platform to actually host third-party applications is really useful as well. And then importantly, it's not enough just to have the applications. You need to actually have the understanding, the expertise, and the knowledge. And that's where we think managed services play a critical role as well. So whether that's energy auditors, energy assessors, analysts, technical building managers, BMS managers, anybody who can start to understand and do something with that data from an experience perspective, and then use their knowledge and understanding to drive optimization back in. So there's sort of different layers of technology from the sort of data collection through to the platform layer onto applications and managed services, but they're all an important part of that data value chain and delivering the objectives that we're aiming for at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So the platform that we're likely to be talking about most of all today is probably going to be our AM&T platform, which is automated monitoring and targeting. And this is effectively somewhere where we can, or an application where we can gather up data from meters and some of those other sources we highlighted earlier, and then put them into a usable format where we can start to investigate and interrogate to try and identify areas of wastage and opportunities to do things more efficiently. So this is just a quick snapshot of the sort of the landing page from the platform that we've been using with Vertex. There's plenty of other AM&Ts on the market, and they all do various similar things, but some of the key features that you want to be looking out for is energy alerting and energy alarms, so you can start to quickly identify overuse and over expenditure. You want to be able to have some dynamic reporting functionality, so you can drill into data and begin to investigate what the driving trends are in those exceptions that we've spotted through the alarming and alerting, and then some kind of league tabling where you can see areas of highest usage or highest level of over usage is probably a better way of describing it. So you can make sure that your activities as energy managers or asset managers is targeted to the areas that's going to deliver the most value. So they're sort of the key features you want to be looking for, and things we can talk about how we've sort of done that in partnership with Vertex with our platform there as well. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the data and what we actually want to do with it in terms of applying a little bit of science, we want to analyze the data. But what do we mean by analyze the data, and what sort of tools do we need to deliver that analysis? And I sort of look to understand this as the two axes, is sort of pounds and CO2 there, but I think sometimes in terms of complexity and value being the axes on the graph. And that as you move through this sort of data value chain, this analysis value chain, you start to unlock additional value, but you have to accept there's going to be greater complexity. So you might have to do more advanced modeling, you might need additional data sets, but that's why we've gone through the work of understanding what data is going to be valuable at the beginning. So as we start to say, okay, we want to be able to be more proactive and prescriptive in our actions, we've already identified what we're going to need to deliver that higher level of data analysis. So in the first instance, something that people are probably already very, very familiar with is descriptive analytics. This is effectively using data to be able to explain what's happened. I used a lot of energy that week. The building used more than we expected, less than we expected. In itself, it's useful because it helps us target our actions and make sure that we're focused on those areas of highest usage, but it doesn't do an awful lot more than that. So we can apply with the managed services and with some different application, the use of some different applications, we can move into more diagnostic type analytics. And that's actually starting to understand what's causing the wastage. Now, this is obviously a higher value because it means that we can say, okay, yes, we've exceeded the expected energy consumption for that period in that building or that space. But we know why. So let's go and do something about it. So actually, it means that our actions, not just our attention, is targeted to the areas of highest value as well. Moving into something that's a little bit more complicated, and this is where we're starting to explore what can be achieved through things like AI and machine learning, is this idea of predictive analysis. And that in a really, really simple sense, it could be a forecast. But when we start to bring in these other data sets, we can start to build out some relatively complex models that enable us to have a really, really good idea of what's likely to happen next. And because we've got the diagnostic piece behind it, we can probably say why that's going to happen, which gives us, again, the ability to take some kind of measures or steps to be proactive and take action to avoid that over usage, and again reducing our overall CO2 and energy costs. And then finally, sort of the highest level of data analytics that we're sort of involved in, and this is where we really are at sort of the front end in terms of technology, is this piece around prescriptive analytics. So this is where the analysis has gone through the descriptive, diagnostic and predictive process, and it's now able to give us an output that tells us what we need to do, and better yet, actually automate that process in some respects. So can we deploy changes to energy policies? Can we update strategies within controls? Can we write down routines that will enable us to take advantage of market conditions that are favorable for export or import or whatever it might be? But to have the modeling and the complexity, we need that sort of foundational data piece that we've sort of alluded to throughout this talk so far. So really, in summary, from my point of view, build out those data foundations, understand the technology value chain that you need to have, and then go through that process of data analytics to achieve that ultimate end goal of the data actually starting to feed into operational decisions and delivering best possible value going forward. Next slide, please. What I'm going to do now is introduce Shane, who is going to talk a little bit about his experience of using data and digitization, and sort of the changes in the way they've done things at the Minster building with the team at Vertex. So yeah, over to you, Shane.
Cheers, Paul. Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Shane, and I've been in the building services industry for just over 10 years now. I've been working closely with various subcontractors in that time, ensuring that the buildings are maintained well and run as optimally as possible. In that process, we manage clients' expectations and try to save energy where feasible. I've been working at Vertex for just under 7 years, working my way from site engineer to contract manager, and I have the pleasure in undertaking most of that journey at the Minster building. Next slide, please. The Minster building is a multi-tenanted building with various different occupiers from different sectors of the industry. ranging from insurers, traders, and utility providers, and we also have some retail units. One of these is Third Space, one of London's most prestigious gym franchises, and the other one is Brewdog as well, which is one of the UK's largest branches. During my tenure here, we've had to ensure that service is maintained to all of these premises and cooperate with all the clients and ensure that service is maintained while striving to achieve our targets towards an environmentally friendly work environment, as well as saving energy in the building. Next slide, please. Both ourselves and SSE have successfully worked towards these objectives of our contract, delivering meaningful results for the building and its users. Our focus has been on creating an exceptional working environment for those visiting and operating within the building, ensuring comfort, productivity, and satisfaction for all occupants in the process. We've prioritised optimising building performances. Sorry, I'm a bit ill, so while reducing maintenance costs through a proactive data-driven approach. This has enhanced efficiency and minimised expenses. Energy efficiency has been central to our strategy, maximising savings whilst maintaining optimal and environmental conditions. By balancing these needs, we've supported both occupant comfort and sustainability. Aligned with the building and client's sustainable business strategy, our efforts have helped achieve energy goals, reducing consumption and reinforce our commitment to net zero. Ultimately, this work has led to increased tenant satisfaction, creating spaces that are efficient, sustainable, and centred on people. These results highlight the impact of clear focus objectives. Next slide, please. So how have we achieved this? Well, ourselves and SSE have worked very well together. The partnership between SSE and Vertex is built on collaboration and continuous improvement. SSE start by gathering and analysing the building data, identifying any potential opportunities for optimisation. These findings are then reviewed together with the client, allowing us to align on potential changes that meet our client's goals. Once these are approved, the changes are implemented and we continue to monitor the system to ensure effectiveness. This monitoring closes the loop, allowing us to refine and repeat the process. It's this ongoing cycle of data, collaboration and improvement that's key to our success and ensures we deliver lasting results for the building and its occupants. Next slide, please. So these are some of the things that we actually put in place upon the start of our journey together. The first step was improving system visibility. By partnering with SSE, we connected all submeters to an advanced energy management platform, which is BEI, such as Paul mentioned earlier, enabling us to analyse energy profiles and set alarms for any potential deviations. With SSE's control specialists, we identified key improvements to major systems in order to better optimise the building. Here are some of the highlights. So we optimised demand. So LTHW and chilled water enable set points were fine-tuned for each floor based on their occupancy levels, allowing energy use with real-time demand. We implemented chiller hold-offs. We minimised energy use on the chillers by holding off the chillers during low outside air temperatures, utilising free cooling where appropriate. We also made use of a variable LTHW system. So we already had variable flow system, but we also implemented a variable temperature system with this. Therefore, the system temperatures would adjust based on the outside air temperature. This would be to maintain efficiency and flow rates. And more recently, we've implemented CO2 controlled fresh air. So the fresh air supply was modulated to match CO2 levels, improving the air quality and efficiency within the building. These changes have not only reduced energy consumption, but they've also created a healthier and more adaptable environment. Just at the bottom there, you can see some of the savings that we've made. So from 2020 to 2023, with the implementations, we essentially saved approximately 113,000 kilowatt hours year on year. This year, with newer sort of innovations that we've implemented in the building, we've saved an additional 150,000 kilowatt hours a year. Meaning, in summary, as of next year, we'll be saving approximately 263,000 kilowatt hours a year from the start of the project together. Next slide, please. So by improving air quality and regulating temperatures, we've reduced exposure to indoor pollutants, creating a healthier environment for everyone within the building. This will potentially lead to noticeable improvements in concentration and productivity, as when the air is cleaner and conditions are comfortable, it's easier to stay focused and perform at our best. Occupiers, as a result, may see a drop in absence, as healthier conditions mean fewer illnesses and less time away from work. These efforts are proof that energy saving isn't just good for the planet, it's good for people too. Next slide, please. In summary, we're working towards the future of decarbonisation. We've implemented control measures such as CO2 controlled ventilation to help optimise air quality, ensuring ventilation systems respond dynamically to CO2 levels for a healthier and more comfortable environment. We've also optimised demand, allowing us to fine-tune energy usage by adjusting heating and cooling based on real-time building use. This not only reduces waste, but also enhances occupant comfort by delivering resources where and when they're needed. We've also implemented variable temperature control on the LCHW systems to provide valuable insight to environmental conditions, enabling smarter control of HVAC systems. These are just some of the actions we have undertaken to date to work towards our objectives. We are now looking at repeating the variable temperature control system and implementing this onto the chilled water system, as well as potentially integrating lighting control to the BMS system, linking PIR sensors with zonal occupancy and enable local fan coil units accordingly. By incrementally integrating these systems, we can create a building that is more energy efficient, responsive, and aligned with occupant needs. I'll leave the rest to Paul.
Brilliant, Shane. Thanks very much. Really insightful presentation. So just a word on the future then, really. I think sort of Shane summarised really sort of very well what we've been doing there at the Minster in partnership with Vertex, and what those sort of immediate next steps look like. As the technology arm of SSE, we're very focused on what the future looks like and how we can continue to develop our applications and develop our platform to deliver greater value as we go forward. So we're looking to deploy some AI-powered analytics that will give us we'll start to uncover additional wastage. So we're modeling that at the moment using data, and again, that collaborative piece is really important. So if we can find partners that enable collaboration, then all the better. And we're looking at how we can use forecasting to sort of further sort of precondition spaces and look for and chase those additional savings, additional benefits, whilst always maintaining occupancy well-being, occupancy comfort as a real priority, as is the need for that building and that use case. And then from a future perspective, the next thing is how we're going to actually take those buildings and treat them as assets within the wider energy system. And is there an opportunity to engage in things like flexible markets, DFS, demand flexibility service, or any local flexibility through the DSOs? And that basically means that we can start to chase down revenue opportunities that can be reinvested into optimizing and enhancing the performance of the building going forward as well. So with one eye on the future, it's how can we leverage AI? How can we leverage the technology that's coming down the track? How can we build out the applications that are going to deliver additional value over and above, whilst also maintaining those sort of key criteria of comfort and occupancy well-being? And then can we engage that system into the wider energy network, enabling flexibility, ensuring resilience, and continuing to be a sustainable building into the future? And ultimately, this comes down to the SSE sort of ethos around whole system thinking, and we're hoping that using these platforms and data being the foundational piece to that, we can actually make the whole system think and begin to sort of really automate and drive additional value through the power of data. So yeah, that's me finished. Thank you. Obviously, we'll be opening up the Q&A. Josh, I don't know if you want to explain anything more on that quickly.
Yes, thank you very much both for a very interesting presentation. I will say, yeah, we already have quite a few questions, but if you do have anything you want to ask or anything that, kind of sparked your interest during that you particularly want addressed, put it in now or upvote the ones that you think someone's already asked that you'd like to see. That's always very useful for us to just kind of prioritize questions. I will begin with one that was up almost immediately. I think, Mark, you were wanting to address this one. So implementing projects to improve data, such as installing sub-meters, often requires investment. Businesses want payback period information and expected savings for CapEx projects. How can these sorts of things be calculated for data improvement projects? Mark.
So, thank you for your question, Kieran. It's a really good question. And just to introduce myself, I'm Mark. I work for Vertex in the technical services team. I think you've got to take a step back with clients, and we definitely have this, in our business, budgets are tight. Clients, want typically like 5-year ROIs. They want to see quite a short time frame in terms of return on investment. But I think that what I would do and what I think our team would do is, first of all, look at the scope of the job. So, how much is the cost of the job going to be? And, I think the question you need to ask the client is, what are the future requirements of the building? So, the building now, the way it's operating might be fine, but in 5 years' time, the billing strategy may change. It's very likely that, metering requirements are going to tighten up in the industry. So you've seen like recently what happened with the heat metering regulations. If you haven't got that sub-metering info, it's going to be, a potential challenge. And I think it's trying to, in a polite and efficient manner, tackle that short-termism from the client in the sense that, there's a data and AI revolution going on. And if they, aren't willing to kind of take that initial investment piece, let them know obviously the way the industry's going. Everyone's going towards AI analytics platforms. And then, for example, at the Minster building, the guys have saved a shed load of energy and data. And it's just about trust as well. It's got to be a leap of faith from the client in the sense that, look, we've done this good work. We've gone as far as we can with the data and the telemetry we've already got. But, if you take this leap of faith with us, we will then look to kind of, provide a clear ROI, because we'll have data which can then eventually go through our analytics platforms in order to drive sort of more meaningful change. And yeah, just I think it's really important that the way it's going with EPCs and neighbours and stuff like that, if you haven't got this data and you can't drive down savings, buildings are assets. And the way it's going in our industry is that if you're not going to be driving meaningful change, your building is going to get devalued. You're going to get a D, C, E ratings on your EPC. You're going to be less favourable on your neighbours. You might have a potential loss of, tenants and landlords. So it's not so much scaremongering, but I think it's just letting them know that there's a long-term view there. It can't always be like I need a 2-year ROI. It's okay, what are we doing with here? Where are we looking? What direction do we want to go? And how can we support each other? I'm not sure I answered the question entirely, but that's how I'd kind of put that back to the client. We definitely have similar challenges ourselves with that. So I'll leave that there to anyone else if they want to add to that.
I'll just add something very quickly. So I think the point you make about the a more sustainable asset is a more valuable asset. And if you're thinking of the building as an asset, that's certainly true. It's also true when you're talking in other sectors where it's not necessarily commercial real estate, but even in logistics or manufacturing, most people are finding that their customers are asking for, what's your plan for net zero? How are you making your site more sustainable? What's the carbon impact of your product? These are all questions that are being asked. And I think, the market is asking for these things all the time. So there's a business case for sustainability. And our argument being that data is sort of the big driver towards that. The point that maybe to sort of try and get honing onto the question a bit more on, how do you make that business case for additional technology or projects to actually gather data? I think really the first thing is to understand the objective and the use case of the data. And I think if you've got a really, really good handle on the use case, i.e., we acknowledge that there's probably some wastage here. We think it's this much. We want to implement something to improve it. Then you can start to roll that into the sort of the business case and the decision-making process for investing in the technology. So that's something you can think about. The other thing is that there's an awful lot of data that isn't necessarily particularly expensive to get hold of. So lots of third-party data can be really, really useful in terms of sort of the modeling and the predictive side of things. And a lot of buildings, a lot of assets have sources of data that perhaps can be accessed easier than you might think through a bit of smart integration. There's more and more in terms of, and again, I suppose the other thing around AI and what it's enabling us to do is to actually go and integrate with complex systems and pull out the data we want, because we can sort of set it off to find the data rather than having to have a person go through and start tagging and doing the sort of the time consuming expensive way of doing it. So I suppose there's sort of three answers there. I think it's a good idea to do it. Use what's available to you, and then technology hopefully makes it a little bit easier to find some of the data that may already exist within those systems. So yeah.
Cool. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's answered kind of a couple of questions there where people are talking about capital spend versus savings. So I'll move on to one for you, Shane, which is specific, I think, to the site. Someone's mentioned, just to confirm, is there any gas on site, and has gas consumption also gone through the same program mentioned?
Yeah, so our boilers are gas fed, and yeah, the variable temperature system that we implemented, literally you could see quite a big reduction in the gas consumption off the back of that. There are also other things as well. So by optimizing each floor, whilst that also reduces your chilled water consumption in the winter, it will also reduce the heating consumption as well. And subsequently, the boilers may run for a lot less, and therefore we'll see less gas consumption overall.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you.
Can I also add to that quickly?
Yeah.
Because I think decarbonisation of heat's a massive challenge. We've got a huge reliance on gas boilers and sort of the infrastructure around that in the UK, and there's lots of different ideas being thrown around about what the future's going to look like, whether it's going to be heat networks, or some people are backing hydrogen, whether it's going to be electrified heat through air source heat pumps or other electrical sources of heat. I think, going back to a point that Mark made at the beginning, is understanding what the use of these buildings or these assets are going to be in a year, 2 years, 5 years time is really, really important. And the data actually in terms of supporting decarbonisation of heat is really critical as well, because if we can model forward the expected demand, the heat demand, not just optimizing what we have today, but understanding what we're going to need in the future, we can more accurately size and specify decarbonise heat schemes to actually enable us to decarbonise our heat, which is a big challenge. So it's a really, really useful tool in that heat decarbonisation decision-making process too.
Brilliant. Okay. I think this one's one that's going to be thrown open. It has it's been upvoted, so we'll kind of get onto that next. There are so many opportunities and possibilities for using data and energy management. Where would you begin with this? So what low-tech steps can be used to demonstrate the opportunities and open the door to wider investment in the business? So anyone who kind of wants to answer that one, I think.
I can maybe start just from a perspective of, I know we spoke about some sites that have got poor metering. So something that we implemented here was to essentially have a look at the plant. We've got data plates on a lot of the plant there, and we can see how much those particular assets are consuming. If we know how long specific assets are running for example, if you've got a chiller that runs for 8 hours a day, you can work out your kilowatt hour consumption based off of that. And from that period, from that sort of information, you could sort of further hone that and go and think, oh, what can we do to maybe reduce this a little bit? Do we need to be running the plant for this long? So I think looking at what you've got on the site is probably the first step in that sort of process. Because I know someone else has said they don't necessarily have all these sort of top-notch meters on site. I think it starts on the ground first, and then we can take it up from there.
Yeah. And I think in terms of metering as well, don't be afraid of starting higher level. There's value to be achieved from just looking at granular data from your main energy meters onto site, your main power meter, your main gas meter. If you can access half-hourly data, put it in a platform where you can start to analyze it, you'll uncover savings straight away. Excuse me. So it doesn't have to be really, really granular, but the profile data is really, really important. There's going to be market-wide half-hourly settlement coming around and more proliferation of smart meters as well. So hopefully access to more granular data, excuse me, more profile data, even at that sort of boundary meter level will be really useful.
I was going to add to that as well, Paul. I think it's absolutely right. What SSE and what we're doing here at Minster is obviously quite cutting edge. We're using AI and quite advanced solutions. I think, on a more simplistic point of view, absolutely agree with Paul in a sense. Start with the main metering. Start just build a profile of what your building's consuming, and you can just gain a lot from that in terms of, okay, so what's our energy consumption month on month? So on some of our more simplistic sites, or some of our sites where they're not quite so technologically advanced, or listed or historic buildings with poor metering data, you can look at the more kind of marginal wins in terms of looking at set points of boilers. So, is your boiler at 80 degrees? Could you reduce it down to 70 or 65? Obviously, assuming you're not going to affect secondary hot water systems, etc. Can you look to reduce speed on your inverters? There's lots of ways you can do things in terms of reducing energy without having to go down the full tech route. I think what the guys here have done, they've gone through the, I don't like using the word, but low-hanging fruit, and now they're going for the marginal gains using this technology, and they're using AI and using data, and they're really leveraging insights, which frankly a human couldn't do looking at a BMS going through alarms and strategies and alerts. So once you've kind of done the basics well in terms of checking basic functionalities, checking metering, and starting to profile, then you can kind of go into those more advanced steps for sure, and huge rewards can be had from that.
Definitely. And just to add again, it's the importance of sort of checking that feedback loop as well. So if we're making adjustments to a set point, or making an adjustment to the runtime, or the speed of an inverter or a fan or a drive, it's actually just making sure that we're qualifying the fact that it's not having a negative impact on performance in other areas, because we still have a job to do. We have to provide spaces, we have to provide services, we have to make things. That's ultimately what energy is being used for. So it's understanding the impact and then making good decisions that are hopefully improving and driving benefits across the board, not having a negative detrimental impact further down the line somewhere. And that's data's really, really key to that.
Cool. Okay, thank you both for that one. We have one that is I think related to the site again. So was it easier to do on a greenfield site versus one with a heavier legacy? I think in terms of kind of creating that energy data.
So at this particular building, it's a bit of a unique one. So the building is actually around 45 years old, I believe. However, it underwent significant refurbishment back in 2018. So it's a little bit of a mixture of the both. The chillers, for example, we inherited a lot of the basement plant. I think with sort of how this day and age is going, a lot of the sites being set up now are with sort of the mindset that they are working towards net zero, and they want to sort of eliminate sort of carbon emissions as much as possible. I think with older sites, it's probably a little bit more difficult. However, with the implementations that you can put in, you're probably likely to see bigger energy savings once they are implemented.
I think we've lost Josh. So while he's not here, I'll just fill in for a second and say that basically what Shane's put it really, really well there. Buildings now, you'd hope that are being designed to be, to gather that data by design and to be efficient by design and to give us that flexibility by design as well, which is the key thing. So is it easy with greenfield if we're starting from scratch? Inevitably, you can get that at design level of you can ask for what you want there. So it will always be simpler, and the retrofit challenge is a big one. But that said, a huge proportion of the building stock we have today is going to need to be retrofitted, and the sort of data question is something that needs to be answered. So I think it's really, really important to look at it on a case by case basis and work out again what the objective is, what the future for that building or asset is. And actually sort of build out a plan that takes you forward. I'll just jump into the questions to see if there's anything else that's jumping out to be answered. Anything's been upvoted. There's a site question there for Shane. Do you vary temperatures for AHUs or only radiators? I'll let you answer that one if that's okay.
Yeah, so in this building, we don't have any radiators. So we've got fan coil units and we've got air handlers. I know some buildings do have radiator systems on site, and some buildings also run their boilers specifically for AHUs and fan coils and radiators. Ultimately, though, I think the variable temperature system could be implemented across all three. So it's something that does sort of apply to all.
Well, thanks, Shane. And then the next question I just want to look at is Lawrence has asked, there's lots of technology, lots of stuff out there, but it's difficult to action things because of a break in communication between FMs, BMS engineers, energy managers, other stakeholders. I think that's a really, really interesting question. It's a really valid one because, and something that actually I'm a strong believer that data can be used to overcome actually that challenge. What data gives us, the right data in the right format with the right sort of analysis around it, it gives us knowledge, it gives us foresight, and it gives us the ability to tell the right story and actually get messaging across in the right way and drive engagement. So if you are finding that there's a disconnect between different stakeholders within an organization, actually data can be the bridge that pulls you together. So what I would say is when you're sourcing applications or tools to analyze that data, one of the key features to be looking for is reports that make sense, that are really easily understandable, that are really clear in the messaging. Because if you can make the messaging clear, you're more likely to drive engagement across those different stakeholders and actually be able to move towards achieving the objectives you want to achieve, rather than being stuck with people saying, well, yeah, it's a lovely idea, but I'm going to carry on doing my thing. So data can be a real sort of enabler in terms of overcoming that challenge. I see we've got Josh back. Hey,
yeah,
Josh.
I'm back. Sorry about that. The laptop crashed. It was going far too swimmingly. I think we have time for one more question. I can no longer see the Q&A. It's gone for me. So if you'd like to answer, which you appear to have been doing, whichever your kind of favorite is, or any last one that you think might be very useful, and then we'll kind of wrap up for today.
Yeah, there's the question. I think it's come up more than once on cost. Again, I think cost is such a tricky question because it is very much case by case. At the end of the day, I would hope that any solution that either grabs hold of data, puts it in an environment to make it usable, does something with it, optimizes, whatever, it's got to pay for itself. So understanding the business case, going right back to the start of the presentation and properly understanding the outcomes you're trying to achieve and what that means to the organization, and then being very selective about the data that we're gathering, understanding what data is going to add value, that's really, really critical. And I think sometimes that comes from having trusted partners. One of the things that's really come out of the relationship that we've had with Vertex is the strength of the partnership in enabling us to take these steps and actually drive the opportunity forward. And I think that's something that you need to get right. So make sure you're working with people where you've got it needs to be less transactional and much more partnership led, I think, and where you've got to focus on long term, or not long term, but an ongoing return on investment where there's confidence in the value that's being delivered. And again, when we talk about sort of that value chain in terms of delivery, a lot of the time you can look at a project as being loads and loads of sort of bits that we've got to spend on to achieve one output at the very end. And actually, when we're talking about data and deploying these technologies, we're really fortunate because we can actually start to unlock these blocks of value as we move through that journey. So as sort of Shane alluded to with the presentation about the things that we've been able to do, as we've invested more, as we've looked at deploying more technology, every time we've done that, we've unlocked a benefit, unlocked additional benefits. It's a bit like gamification almost, but we can actually start to see the benefits. It's not all about this sort of utopian end goal. Just by beginning the process, we're starting to unlock opportunity, and we're taking and working together and delivering on that opportunity. So it's got to deliver. Costs, can you give a cost as to what is the cost? Not easily, but we can look on a case by case basis. I think that answers that question.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that will wrap up the webinar. I would like to thank SSE for sponsoring this webinar, and especially our two fantastic speakers, Shane and Paul, for giving us the time and for kind of providing such an interesting and kind of educational masterclass on everything we've talked about today. I'd also like to thank everyone at home for watching, for providing questions, for engaging and kind of making this such an interesting webinar. If you want more of this kind of content with analysis, in-depth articles, personalized content, all of that, I suggest look at edie membership for more of this sort of thing. It's kind of very good for networking, for collaboration, and like I said, for more in-depth content like this. You can there you go on the website or the QR code for edie membership and kind of follow through to there. Otherwise, I will just reiterate, thank you guys so much. Paul, Shane, and of course Mark for helping with the questions. It's been fantastic, and I think we'll see you next time for the next edie webinar. Thank you all very much for joining. Cool. Bye for now.